Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this installment of the P2 podcast. Switching it up, kick Bryce off this week. Want to bring in our registered dietitian, Paige, our head of nutrition here at P2, to talk about something pretty cool, and probably very near and dear to her heart, working with so many moms and being a most awesome mom herself. And that is talking fitness, talking food, diet relations with your kids. How do you show up around them? How do you talk to them when they have questions? I think that's a really interesting topic, especially in a place where there's so much gray. Like how do you help round out a person's perspective on something, especially in such formidable years, or formative years rather. So yeah, obviously, welcome, Paige. Thank you very much
Hi.
for doing this,
Yeah, I'm
and
really excited.
let's jump right in.
It definitely is something that I love talking about now because I'm so in it. And I guess you always are as a parent. And the cool thing is I'm still learning as I'm going, but like you said, I have so many clients who have different ages of kids that have brought up topics with me that obviously I've not even had to think of yet. So I love talking about it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So I'm not a parent yet, to my knowledge, um, but I have nieces and nephews,
Mhm.
and my my family is full of big people. Like we have some small people, but like it's full of big people. Culturally, just Black culture, we eat lots of grease and butter and all the good stuff, right? Twice baked mac and cheese is not just reserved for Christmas. Um, and it's all good stuff. And also, I had to break a lot of habits in college, right? Like I didn't drink water as a kid unless I had just run suicides in practice. That's the only time water tastes good. Or if I was outside playing football and there was hose water available, we obviously, fortified our bodies with that good old hose water. But you know, it was not until I got to college where I just told myself like, hey, for whatever reason, I'm like, I'm just gonna stop drinking pop and juice and just have water because it was unheard of. Like I always had juice. I
Mhm.
always had pop with a meal, especially. Like I remember coming downstairs and going, Dad, I'm thirsty. You can get some water. Never mind. And then walking back upstairs, like I'm good. Like it just wasn't a thing we did. Even my dad to this day has a Coke with every single meal. That is just how he operates, right?
Mhm.
Water bottle half full from the morning, right? Like he doesn't drink very much water, and so a dietary habit just as simple as that that's picked up on, that's absorbed as a kid through just home style habits,
Mhm.
that shit imprints. And
Yeah.
so how do you get kids to be conscious of those kinds of habits, with what they put in their mouth, of how they burn energy, how active they are or are not.
Mhm.
As I see my niece and I'm like, dude, like we need to get her in a sport. We need to do something other than dolls. Her mom's bigger. I don't want this to be something that she has to struggle with, and also I don't want to make her so conscious of it that it's crippling. And now she is measuring every morsel of food she puts in her mouth, or she's getting up at 5:30 every single morning as a fucking 8-year old going out for a run or a jog.
Mhm.
I don't want that for her either. And so, how do you tread that tightrope?
Yeah, I feel like uh, opposite end of the spectrum, my parents never bought pop. We did not have soda in our house. And it was also never labeled as bad. We just never had it in the house. It was just not a go to. We'd go other places and it would be around. But my
Mhm.
brother and I didn't drink it. And I still don't drink it to this day. And I just never got the taste for it. And so, yeah, I feel like, my parents never even, I'm sure in passing, maybe, especially generational, they said, not good for you. But I wasn't afraid to have it necessarily. We just didn't have it. Um, and so, yeah, it's very interesting that what your parents did became something that you did. Um, and I do think that it does start with how you talk about things. More specifically, I love the idea, especially with really young kids. Like, let's truly start from the beginning. Like, I have a 3-year old, 2-year old, 4-month old. And so I'm not even like, take body image out of it. I I love the idea of calling food what it is instead of a label. So the obvious good and bad, but even Like ice cream isn't a treat, it's ice cream. A lollipop isn't it's candy, that's what it is, but it's not a treat, it's a lollipop. And so right off the bat, you associate food with just being food. Just it's all food. It's all things that you're allowed to have. And I also think that when you start at an early age, I've realized this and it's so cool to live it with my 3.5, almost 4 year old. She's so smart. And I think at that age, they absorb more than you realize. And she'll regurgitate like scientific, like offhand things that I'll say to like Brad. And so when we talk about food with her, we call things protein, carbs, and fats because that's what they are. And instead of saying, no, you can't have that because it's not good for you, we'll say, actually, I got this. This is really cool. I got this. My husband said it first. So Brad said this before I even ever said this, and we've stuck with it. And I love this too because he totally got this from just like living with me, like how I post and how I talk. And he says some things have flavor and some things have nutrition and some things have both. And I love that because that's so true. So instead of saying that's not good for you, you say this is mostly flavor, because that also implies that like flavor is a good thing, so we need flavor. Flavor stimulates like the mental side of things that we love about food. So it doesn't even like flavor is not, it's a negative, it doesn't have a negative connotation. So you can say something's mostly flavor. You need a little bit of nutrition with that flavor. And I love that. When he said that, I was like, it's so great. Similarly, if she has something, especially like a late at night or a snack, she'll of course always want like the things that taste the best, like the fruit snacks and the things that are mostly carbs, as most kids do. And instead of saying, no, you can't have that, I'll say you can't have that by itself. And so now at 3.5 years old, she goes, ooh, I know, fruit snacks and a protein. Dead serious. So she knows that she can have that as long as she pairs it with something. And that's teaching her at such a young age that you need to balance your nutrition. Like quite literally, middle-aged adults with diabetes have to, that's how they control their diabetes, by adding a protein to their carbs. And so she can control sugar crashes and, sugar spikes before bed by literally so she'll even be able to name 5 protein sources. She's like cheese stick, yogurt, she's like, it's so cool. And it also empowers me as a parent to say yes, even though I don't want her to have fruit snacks at 8:30 p.m. I will let her, and she'll get a yes out of me because she's using critical thinking. She knows what she needs to have with it to get it. And so she gets a yes out of me. And I think that that's also like, it's not just a because I said so situation, it's kind of late. I always ask, is your tummy empty or full? And of course she always says empty, whether it is or not. And I say, okay, what do you want? And it's just a cool way to start that so early on. So just being very factual and matter of fact, and you can keep things simple so that they are retained. But it's crazy what they really pick up on so early.
Yeah, no, it is nuts. My little brother is very much the same way. I'm sure we all were. It's just funny to see it like very up close. He was 10 years younger than me, so I was in a space where I could very much observe him.
Yeah.
And so it is just interesting to watch. I don't know if you saw what I posted on my story the other day. I was asking like, what would people, if they had absolute power for a day, like what would they change?
Yeah.
And for me, it's always come back to education, because I think that one, if you teach a mass something, you can very much encourage a thinking pattern, and then you don't have to do things like set rules, because people will self-police based on the knowledge that they have. So you have the ultimate power when you can control what people digest and internalize. And so I presented a thought experiment. Like, imagine telling, Zoe, imagine going, hey, this is the truth on Monday, and then telling her something that is completely contrarian on Friday, and say, actually, Monday, that's false. This is the truth now. It might be confusing for her. It might be a little unraveling, but I think very early, what you've instilled is her ability to focus on how she thinks as opposed to what to think.
Hmm.
And I think so often when you say, hey, that's bad, that's good, that's bad, that's good, and you don't offer context, you don't offer the facts, you are telling, someone, a child, how to think. Sorry, what to think, as opposed to how to think, versus giving her the facts and then
Hmm.
allowing them to do the critical thinking of parsing through what they know, what they've heard, and then come to you with a, hey, this is what I think I want to do in alignment with how you've taught me and what you've
Hmm.
given me as fact. And I think that that is so much more impactful. We have adults that still need to be spoon fed data and facts on how to do things. But if you can teach that at a very, very early age, you end up with a lot more agency, right? More control. You feel less like life is happening to you because you are consistently crafting the way you view life and the way you behave in it.
Yeah, when you posted that, I immediately thought of politics and how I was raised, and it was very polarizing. And it really wasn't until no one in my close circle, at least, brought that idea to me
Hmm.
until Brad, until it was like in my face, and he's very much so. A very, for example, a very reputable news outlet would post something and he'd be like, okay, hold on a second. And he would deep dive, 45 minutes deep dive. And I love that because I literally would be like, oh, wow, as
Hmm.
that's fact, that's crazy, move on. But like he would be like, okay, but this, and this, isn't this crazy? And it really made me realize that I wish that I would have had that earlier on, and it would have been really cool to have that perspective rather than just having, yeah, a one sided. It takes way longer to get there, right? If you're
Hmm.
not taught that for sure. Um, and I think that actually makes me think of another thing that you can say to your kids is because obviously a lot starts in home life, but their environment outside of home life really creates who they are. And it's where they spend most of their time, and it's their friends and um, their teachers and things like that. And daycare, especially at a young age. Um, and one thing that you can do is if they come home or come to you or you overhear them saying something that you didn't teach them, you, instead of like immediately trying to course correct, like asking them, like, what makes you feel that way? Where did you learn that? How does that make you feel? For example, like if your kid says I'm fat, don't say, "Oh my God, honey, you're not fat." It's like, well, where'd you hear that? Or did you learn that having more body fat on you is a bad thing? Or, I guess that's kind of leading. But the point is asking questions.
Yeah.
And I love that because they'll surprise you that, if you create that conversation relationship with them early on, like they'll come up with something, they'll say something, and you can build on that. And I do love that because in every aspect, again, it could be body image and how they see food and people buying, groceries that you don't buy. But it also can be like politics and religion. And, it should be more of a, where did you hear that? How does that make you feel? What do you think? And I do really appreciate that part of getting to be a parent and like
Hmm.
having them become their own little person. Um, but specifically with food, and I even saw a post like again around like grocery shopping and like why don't we buy these snacks? It's like just you can keep it. It's not on the list today, right? Like you can. I do also appreciate it being very age appropriate. So
Hmm.
Zoe at 3, like I don't want to I don't want to get into it. It's not on our list today,
Hmm.
and then when she's 5 and 6, then it's, why don't we buy this stuff? Well, we get this stuff instead. Maybe it can become, depending on what the food is and how you want it in your house, like let's get it once a week, like let's have a pizza night, let's, you know or every time you go to this person's house, which I know is twice a week, you can have it. It's like making it a conversation, I think, is
Yeah.
really
Yeah. And I think that to your point and kind of a combination of our points, I feel like you said, so much of our development happens away from our parents, away from their safeguards and their bumper lanes. Which is why I do think it's very important to teach your kids how to think as opposed to what, because then if you, and I think my dad and I always had this idea, like this kind of relationship. Like when I came home and I told him I felt and thought something, he knew that I had already battle tested it. Like he knew, because like that's how our house was. Like, and not in a great way. My dad was very young and impatient and a very smart individual, especially with logic, which is why I'm so logically sound. That's why I grip to it so much. But if I came up with something or I said I felt something or I thought something, he would be like, why? And then if I could not articulate it quickly or in some sort of or articulate chronology, he would look at me like I had just said the dumbest thing in the world. Obviously, not something you want to do to your kids,
Yeah.
but very, very quickly and swiftly, it was teaching me like you better think about it. Like you like don't just say things, don't just do things, don't just adopt things. You better think about it. Like, do you feel this way, or were you just told something? And with my parents being so very overtly fallible early, like I saw very quickly that they were not perfect people. I became sus of everybody. And I was like, you know what? There's probably a bit of truth in everything and probably a bunch of bullshit in everything as well. So when I perceive something, it's never matter of fact. It never is as is. It's a quick search or a library find away from me fully understanding the validity of what was said and how much, weight I should carry it forward with. And so it sounds like the way that you do things instills that kind of thought process of like, here are the facts. And also, you're consistently checking new facts against the facts that you know and seeking more facts to make sure that those facts are just as valid tomorrow as they were today.
Hmm. It just makes me so excited to see like what kind of people they become. It's so crazy. And we don't say because I said so, obviously. But I do think that because we know that she's so smart, we'll say it almost in jest. And
Mhm.
her literal answer is that's not a reason. I'm like, spot on.
How do
You're
you how do you balance the mindfulness around health and wellness and really instilling good habits, right? Like we do these things because we love our bodies, we want to take care of our
right.
bodies. And I don't want to ever get to the point to where you're doing things now that hurt your body or hurt you mentally, emotionally. And how do you know when to kind of call it? Hey, hold on. We're being a little too mindful. We're being a little too microscopic with our
Mhm.
approach here.
So, first of all, when you're health conscious, and especially coming from like the backgrounds that we have where we've seen it get really specific and really controlling and unhealthy in ways, it's really important to know that whatever you're doing, you need to know why you're doing it before you're going to be able to explain it. And I think that that's one of the most important things in anything that you ever do is you need to know your concrete reasons for doing it. So if it's fat loss, if you want to change the way that you look, you better have some damn good solid reasons, because now in front of your kids, you're going to have to say them. And
Hmm.
if you're in a position like if you need to imagine your kid saying, why are you doing this? You need to have those answers ready, because it can't be because I hate the way I look, because this person thinks this way of me, because even because I don't fit into clothes. I mean, it needs to be like, think about how you'd want them to think. And so, first of all, the first thing is anything that you do, have your reasons, but also everything you do needs to come from you in a positive way, because that's
Hmm.
how it will be portrayed. If it comes from you in a negative way, like this sucks, for example, tracking, weighing your food, getting a workout in. If you scoff all the way to the gym or say, you know, I don't want to work out today and like make it this big thing, they're going to think that working out is this awful thing, that it's something that they're being forced to do, and it's not fun. And so anyone, kids, partner,
Hmm.
anyone in your life is going to be like, oh, that sucks you do that. Like same way with handling tracking nutrition, right? Like if you pick up your phone and you're scoffing and like, oh my God, you guys, hold on. Sorry, like, then of course people are gonna be like, ooh, never want to do that. But if
Right.
you're like, if you just get down the habit of planning ahead and doing it secretly and be everyone's on their phone anyway, just be on your phone and don't even mention it. If you have your reasons and can every day keep what you're doing positive, then your kids will pick up on that. And then side note, if you can't keep it positive, maybe don't do it anymore for your own self. Um, but then I think also again, when they ask questions, making it like a conversation and making sure that you're not uh, projecting any of your thoughts onto them also.
Hmm.
I think that when you want your kids to be healthy, you also need to check yourself and remember that you can be healthy in a bigger body. And the difference between a kid and an adult is that kids do grow at different rates, and they may have some more body fat on them during adolescence just because hormones are changing. And you have to be careful because you can't just assume that how they look isn't how they should look and is how they're going to look forever. And I think that that's difficult, especially if you're someone with like a disordered childhood, or, you've dieted your whole life and then all of a sudden you see your kid. This is probably so hard for people to like hear, but if you see your kid starting to live in a body that you wouldn't want to live in, you better be real quiet about it. Like that better stay in your head, and you have to think, where is that coming from? And is it just not how I want them to look? Is it actually related to their health? Will it make them a better person? And truly just living through example. Like you cannot look at your 15-year-old kid and say, maybe don't eat that. They will carry that into adulthood for the rest of their lives, whether it's with that food or that weight, that number on the scale, or, I mean, even for example, I had a client who had a teenage daughter. And at one point she checked in and she's like, I know, I'm not going to make this about my daughter, but she came to me with a weight loss goal, wants to lose 30 pounds, and she's a teenager. And I'm really nervous, like I want to help her. Is there anything like I can do? And I go, first of all, where did this
Hmm.
goal number come from? You, dude, you. And it's funny because it was finally this full circle moment, because I had been like trying to get her away from the scale and stop focusing on the number, and that's not telling us anything, and let's stop weighing. And so we finally did. And because there's a scale in the house, when her daughter came to her with this weight goal, I go, this is why.
Hmm.
And it was a light bulb moment for her for sure. So I think, yeah, just knowing why you're doing what you're doing and making sure that it's a good thing, first of all, will rub off on your kids.
No, I think that's huge. Language, right? We talk about language all the time, and like how you talk about things, and even like the unspoken, the nonverbals, intonation, the inflection in your voice when talking about certain things. Like those things are huge. Um, so yeah, thank you for that. I guess I would have a follow up question. Are there flags? Are there red flags? Because obviously, I think for me, I think okay, it's not just like when I think about my niece, it's not just the body she's in; it's the habits that she has. Like if she
Mm-hmm.
was up and she was an active kid,
Mm-hmm.
and she wasn't consuming sugar all day long in the
Mm-hmm.
summertime,
Mm-hmm.
then I would probably have nothing to even be concerned about. I'm like, yeah, 'cause I was a chubby kid in like fifth, sixth grade. Then I shot up 8 inches in a summer, and then I would turn into a string bean, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if she was like a really active kid who like had good habits that she was instilling and working on, then I'd be like, oh, she's just a kid, just baby fat, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I see her very sedentary,
Mm-hmm.
right, and I see what her diet consists of,
Mm-hmm.
and like I'm like, hold on, like maybe we start having conversations. Um,
Yeah.
and so I'll pause there because I have a follow up question to that as
Yeah.
well that I think you can eliminate on. But like, how do you go? Well, hey, I think we've crossed a line here. Like
Yeah.
we do need to step in.
Right. I think you like nailed it in observing their habits and their lifestyle. So again, try not to project because, for example, I'm not saying that you do, but for someone maybe who is a gym goer,
Hmm.
um, and their kid rides, their bike down the street to their friend's house, but is on, doesn't want anything to do with the gym. You can't say, well, they need to do what I do. No, they're getting activity. It's just not the way that you want. So first of all, like really evaluate um, their lifestyle. And I think, honestly, I think because it always needs to be health focused, it cannot ever be image, can't be how they look. Because again, that's what carries, that's like what sticks with them, especially during those years, is how are they performing in school? Do they complain about not being able to pay attention, then that probably goes back to diet. Do they complain about, do they get headaches? Honestly, they shouldn't at a young age. Do they talk about being tired all the time? Do they have no interest in things? How do they sleep? Like, you're their parent. They don't need to necessarily pay attention to those health markers. Like, they should be a kid, but you need to pick up on the fact that they're not just complaining. If they're talking about, if school is hard for them, maybe it's actually how their environment at home is. And so I would first start looking at actual things that you probably could find in labs that would manifest themselves in other ways, like brain fog and sleep issues and irritability. I mean, sure, they're a teen and their hormones are insane, but if you think that it's, not because of how you're talking to them, and if it seems out of character, like I will say, like, I think it's time to my husband, I think it's time to look at their diet. Because you're in control of that to a certain extent. There's cool research on, the breakfast that kids start with and how it's sustained energy and protein in the morning that can really carry them into school and facilitate good brain health and thinking. And it's just cool. So I would first look at, again, things that they're saying, ways that they're behaving, without projecting, because again, activity for a 15-year-old is going to look completely different from even their peers, other people their age, from you as an adult, for sure. So being careful not to project. But then, yeah, I do think that promoting well-roundedness, like you said, like, can she get into a sport? Like, what is she interested in, that will get her body moving? And then again, I'm the queen of macros, like, teach them macros. And I honestly think, like, again, it goes back to the parent. If you as a parent listening to this, if you don't know what protein, carbs, and fats are, please learn before your kids become teenagers. Because how are you supposed to help them if you're constantly on a point system with Weight Watchers? Like, how are you supposed to help them? And yeah, I think the other thing I was just going to say about that is it is okay for them to get labs done. So I think if you're concerned about their health, educate yourself as an adult with coaches like us so that you can learn about yourself and have a little more insight to how you can really get to the bottom of, is their weight affecting their health or not? Because it really has to be about that. It cannot be, again, about how you think they look.
Yeah.
So I think just we get to be the generation that's more in tune with our bodies again. We get to be the generation that understands that labs tell health and BMI doesn't. We get to be the generation to change things. We do not have to be the way that our parents raised us. We don't have to be dieting because we know how our parents' dieting affected us. Like, we lived through that. I'm lucky that I specifically didn't, but God, almost all of my clients, right? Like, my mom did. And we get to change that. You need to start with yourself. And I just feel like, again, educate yourself, because then again, you can have teenagers and be like, let's like make it a cool thing to get labs done, instead of like, oh, pediatrician, and then they go to college and they're the people who don't have doctors until an emergency happens. Like, we can make it cool again, for you to understand your health rather than just making it about how you look.
No, I think that's huge. I think, again, like, I think our childhoods were so different because I grew up with all Black women, right? And, the exercise and nutrition education in a lot of minority communities just isn't there. It's oftentimes passed down, right? Like, what you see your mom go to Bally's, so you go to Bally's, right? Like, that's just kind of how, it's handed down in the lineage. But, for a lot of like Black, brown parents, like, they see their parents go to work, right? They see them work all day and then come home and with little to no time to invest in themselves, in their health, in training, in diet planning, so on and so forth. So they adopt those same behaviors. And then it becomes very normal that you just think that, yeah, you are fit and beautiful when you're young, just because, we're black and it doesn't crack, and that's great. And then you get older and you become a parent and you get fat. And that's just how it goes. Like, women's bodies don't go back, they don't change, or so they don't go back to what they were. They change forever in this like now negative way.
Mhm.
And then it wasn't until seeing like white and affluent women have kids, and then like a year later, it's like, oh, like they don't look like they looked before, but they don't look like my mom looks or my aunt looks like.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, where's that come from? And sure, genetics, and also lack of education, lack of knowledge, and then also I'm sure the external pressure, right? Because there's a pressure of like you look bad, so fix that, which definitely does not help push people in a positive direction. But like you said, wanting to invest and take care of your body because it's cool and you want it to last. Like, to me, I'm like, I want to be able to beat my kids in races for as long as possible. And that requires me to continue to take care of my body, to continue to train, to adapt my training, adapt my nutrition, right? You see a lot of athletes who take up like vegetarian lifestyles or more just calorically conscious lifestyles so they can extend their time in the league, and they usually drop weight. But I'm sure there is aesthetic portions of that, but a lot of it comes from their career health, right? And their ability to keep going. And so, like you said, being able to tie it to more substantial and tangible things beyond just the physical, which I think gives me or brings me to the question that I put a pause on. It's inevitable, right? It is inevitable. Like it will be called into question. What they look like, what others look like will be called into question. And I have multiple examples in my head where I think I got an ex who lost her front two teeth, and I think they didn't grow back for like fucking like months, right? Like not even like little tiny bit, like this gap, right? Beautiful little girl, but when she smiled, it was just goofy looking, right? And her parents just always told her, and not even about her teeth, but just told her in general, her and her sisters, how beautiful they were, that they're the prettiest girls, and da da da. And so she's like, I remember kids talking about my teeth, and I remember thinking like, I'm still the prettiest girl in the world. Because like her parents, that's what they kept telling her over and over again. So she never called it into question because she had such a positive reinforcement as to, who she was and what she was, without even giving acknowledgement to the missing teeth. And then I think about something like me. My dad used to call me Mickey Mouse. He's like, whenever I would get excited, I would talk so fast that it was so fast and high pitched that no one could hear what I was saying. And I even talk fast now. Like, I'm sure people listening, if you've been listening long enough, you hear me stumble over my words. I have to make very conscious efforts to slow my speech patterns down. I've made very conscious efforts in my past to ditch, quote unquote, like black euphemisms, saying certain things, using certain slangs and stuff like that, that were just kind of innate to me that caused not only some bullying, but then also levels of just like communication barrier where people would not completely understand me because I was saying something so fast or using a language pattern they were unfamiliar with. And I think like, what if my dad had just said, hey man, hey, you're a super smart kid and you're saying really cool stuff, but people aren't going to be able to hear all the cool things you have to say
Yeah.
if you say them so fast, as opposed to like making fun of the stutter or the speech impediment. I'm like, I probably could have started at a much early age as opposed to trying to change my speech patterns out of fear, changing them because I wanted to be able to connect and communicate, because that's all I was trying to do in the first place. And so now I develop healthy habits attached to a positive outcome as opposed to avoiding a negative one. And then that brings me to the final point, which then the question. Then I think about being a black kid and how much my parents prepared me for being a black kid in a white world, and the things that I was going to inevitably hear, that things people were inevitably going to do and say around me. And I think about if they hadn't, I would have been tough, right? I would have been like, what the hell did you just call me? Like, what's going on here? Like,
Yeah.
And I imagine that the confusion and the hurt, the stings of a lot of those things, I don't know if they'd been better or worse, but they definitely would have felt a lot different having been unprepared.
Yeah.
So if you do have a kid who is bigger, like when do you let the idea of image into the conversation and body like positivity, comfortability, and then also perception,
Mm-hmm.
and how you handle other people's perception of your body and how it could possibly morph your own. Like, when do you let that start to be a conversation?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think you let it happen when they bring it up, obviously, so another point to like, you don't bring it up. It is not your job to do that. It's your job to facilitate conversation, but that in particular needs to be brought to you. And it could be early on, again, that someone says, oh, this person called me fat. And I do think that there is an age appropriateness to it. Like if she's 5 and it's this
Hmm.
person called me fat, I'm going to be like, okay, what else happened at school today? Or I'll say, how did that make you feel? Do you know what that means? I do again think that when they're little, you just have to, there's so much that they don't know. And if you continue to give a negative connotation to it, then it becomes that for them. So just staying super curious and keeping things very neutral in your questioning, I think when they're little is the way to go. But let's say
I'm
they're,
definitely going to be like, did you call her mama fat? You should have
yeah,
told her
right.
her mama was fat.
What's what's this girl look like? Um, but I do think obviously, yeah, when they're teens, you've got to be real, and probably preteen. Let's be honest. It's gonna
Hmm.
everyone's getting more mature now at the earliest ages, which freaks me out. But it's very important to be aware that you're gonna have to talk about it, or they're not gonna talk to you about it, right? They're not gonna come to you about it. They're gonna go to someone else about it, or it could just get bad, keep it in or
Right.
whatever. So yeah, to your point, I think still keeping it neutral is really important, but have the focus be on, how they feel about it, where they're learning things from. Because if you can create a friendship in that they're willing to say, I saw this on Instagram, right? Or my friend so and so said this or does this or looks this way. I mean, if they can be completely honest with you, then I think that's where the conversation needs to go. And truly, like, again, we can change the narrative. And I love
Hmm.
that athletes are doing it with the Olympics right now, or just did, in that look at all the different body types and shut up about it. Like, you don't have a gold medal. And I truly feel like it could come back to that. Like, those are the things that we need to say to them is and when you were talking, it made me think of, Zoe is very hard headed. She does have, like, as a 4-year-old, she's not having like baby tantrums anymore. She's having like big kid scream, slam the door tantrums. And we're not teaching her that it's bad to be angry. We're teaching her not to slam the door because it could break it. But we're
Right.
saying, if you need to scream, you have safe places to yell, like, so we're teaching her that what she's feeling isn't bad, good and bad, just like food. But, and so similarly, you can't say a body is good or bad. Like, I've said it 5 times now. You can't make it about how they look in a good or bad way, because you're probably projecting. If you think that they're overweight, you're probably projecting, and you should check your own mental. But it needs to be, again, like, why do you think, like, why are you asking me? Where did that come from? What do you think is fat? How, again, how do you think how someone looks relates to health? Let's look at these, athletes. What do you want out of your health? Or like, how do you want, let's focus on what you want your body to do instead of how it
Hmm.
looks. And again, I think just bringing it back to the honestly, the body variety that has always been there, but that just people haven't talked about, because we glamorize really shitty things, and it just has been. I don't know if you uh watch anything on Hulu or browse, but there's Dark Side of the 90s and Dark Side of the
Hmm.
2000s, these series. And there's different seasons, and it's very cool because they'll pick a topic and, like, really, I mean, talk about like the shitty things that happened. It's very cool. And the 2000s, I'm going through them right now, and it's hitting hard, right? Because I know these people, I like lived this stuff, so they'll like bring topics up and I'm like, oh shit. But it's it really is just it's another reminder that you're truly conditioned, right, by
Yeah.
your environment. And again, we can be the generation to change that. Like, we're not our generation is not a TMZ culture anymore. Like we are not like I just love that at least in our echo chamber of a space, we see heroin chic coming back and we're like, fuck that shit. Fuck all fuck but right? We're like immediately no. And that is like a really cool thing. And I think that people who are not in our echo chamber like need to learn that like you can be the one to be like, do you remember when that was a fad and the eating disorder that caused? You know, like I feel like it's just cool to, it's how you frame it, you know? And
Yeah.
so I guess at a young age, to circle back to your question, making it like drawing on what's valuable to them. You have a kid in sports. Let's look at the athletes who play your sports. Let's look at how their bodies look, right?
Yeah.
They're winning Heisman's. They've got gold medals, you know? So I think it needs to be about how you perform, about how your brain works, about how you can play, about how honestly how happy you are, right? Like again, when Zoe's sad, Zoe has this like like she's obsessed with being sad. And I think it's just she's obsessed with feeling feelings. But and so we let her be sad. But also like it's important that they're happy, you know? And so what brings you joy? Like how does your body relate to how you exist in the world and how you are happy in the world? Because it's, and that's the last thing I'll say, reminding them that when somebody says something negative, it's a projection. It's coming from how they feel about their bodies. And, you know, if they say something about your family, it's because they may not have a good home life. You know, if they make fun of how well you're doing in school, it may be because they're not, you know, but again, and even that comes from something. So it should never be like, I must be wrong. I must be fat. I must not be likable. You can learn that early on that someone saying something about you is 100% about them.
Yeah, no, 100%. I'll segue into my next thing by saying like, we'll kind of wrap up here with, I want you to give like the best piece of straightforward advice for parents. I'll start from a training and activity aspect. I think that's why I love sports so much. Like I understand the trickle down effect of having a kid who's involved in sports and what they're going to learn, even just a subconscious osmosis, right? Just like things are going to be instilled in them. Tenaciousness, you know, being goal oriented, driven, understanding discipline, motivation, so on and so forth. So those are all things that I don't feel like I have to go, hey, this is why we do this. I was just talking to M, and I mean, you know, like I think that we all grew up in a generation, right? Like I had He-Man and Superman and the Hulk. Like, you know, I had my own fairy tale variations of like, I need to look like this. Like this is what good, strong, respected, feared, you know, men looked like, right? These are the guys who earned their place. And then obviously you guys had, you know, Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie, you know, so on and so forth, like the Britney Spears generation, Jessica Simpson, so on and so forth, right? So like we had these unrealistic expectations that were often doctored and then presented to us. And I think the one thing that for guys, and this is why it's so important for me that should I be blessed with little girls, that they are in sports. Because I love, just a quick aside, I love when, dude, the minute that I have a bikini competitor who like teeters on the edge, like, I don't think I want to compete. Maybe I just want to be an athlete. I'm like, yes, fuck that shit. Let's do it, right? Let's like do some box jumps and some sprints and shit. And I always come back to a body that performs well often looks good. Like, you know, when I encourage my little ones to play sports, especially the girls, since there's such a fall off rate for girls in sports, right? It will be about performance. It'll be about latter life performance. Like the things you convince your body, you condition your body and adapt your body to today will carry you into being able to do these really cool things as an adult. They will be carried like as a grandparent, so on and so forth. And that's why we do these things, right? We want to perform, we want to win. And the trickle down effect is that their bodies will likely take the shape of one that performs really well, which usually aesthetically is nice, right? And I was talking to Em about this because she has her own rubs and she's gone back and forth. And do I want to be super lean and
Yeah.
small, or do I just want to get, fucking jacked and be like Olympic lifting and so on and so forth again? I'm like, you should do really cool things and your body will take its most natural and optimized space.
Mhm.
And I would bet every dollar I've ever touched that you will be happy with
Mhm.
that body.
Mhm.
I'm like, I love Jennifer Lopez. I also loved Hope Solo. Because that was like, she was built like a goalie. Hope Solo was built like a box, right? Like she
Mhm.
wasn't your typical feminine bottle shape, but she had an optimized body. She was a super athlete, and I thought she was beautiful. I thought she was beautiful on the field. I thought she was beautiful when she did the Body Image magazine when she was naked. And I was like, that she looks great to me, bro. She looks like someone who went out and did really cool things, and her body is wearing all of the memorabilia of all the cool things she's taught it to do. And that's fucking cool. And I think if you can kind of instill that, for those listening, from my opinion there, my anecdote, my life, in that in young kids, like, this is why we do, like, why we play sports. And I don't care, gymnastics, soccer, cross country, basketball, fucking golf, whatever you decide to do, optimize yourself for your best performance in that said thing. And I'm almost guarantee that you will be happy with the aesthetic changes that you see as, fallout from that.
Mhm.
Now they don't have to become the primary driver, because something much more substantial and fulfilling is the primary driver: performance and being a good, healthy person and good athlete. And that's just, how I kind of look at it, and why I will mandate sports, but I won't mandate what sports. Like, you can do whatever you want. Like, we will get out of this house. Like, we will be going to do something.
Mhm. Yeah, and I feel like I really love Brad's just the person for me, because we
That's good.
we come thank God, right? Um, but we come from very different backgrounds and even like interests, and they cross over in the most perfect ways. And he is grateful. He's said multiple occasions he's so grateful we have the gym in our garage, and he'll like throw stuff around every once in a while. But his activity, so just for some background, he is the inventory manager of a guitar pedal manufacturing company. He is a drummer. He's a musician. He has a music studio in our house. I'm the bodybuilder. I'm the dietitian. We didn't meet that way. He was a bartender when I met him. So very different. Just like two people outside of our interests who fell in love, and that I'm obsessed with that part of our relationship, because our kids are going to grow up seeing their dad a musician, their mom a dietitian, and what made me think of this is his favorite ways of getting activity are playing basketball, like just a pickup game,
Mm-hmm.
biking, because we've got so many amazing metro parks, hiking. He would, like, our first couple of dates were just hikes around Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And so we have that well-roundedness. And I think, to your point, like, making sure that your body can at minimum do the things that you like to do, and forever. My mom really, I wanted to say this before, but it would have, I think, went on too long of a tangent. But when you brought up just how you were raised, and how it really does come down to accessibility and time. Like, how many jobs did your parents have? Are you in a food desert? Do you live in the suburbs or the city? There's so many beyond genetics that really plays a role in how you're even able to raise kids. But anyways, I am on the other side of that, in that both my parents were teachers, and my dad actually retired. He's so much older that he was able to retire from his full-time teaching job after 30 years. And he was working then part-time when I was born, which is insane. So he was a part-time teacher at the University of Akron and made dinner for us every day from scratch. Like, I can't even provide my kids with that, but no wonder I have such a good relationship with food. And then my mom, who watches my kids 4 days a week, is climbing trees because she did gymnastics for 25 years.
It's awesome.
And my entire life was never about dieting, You know, it wasn't until college that my dad would say things like, I avoid all white sugar and all white flour. And thank God I was my own person then, because I was like, okay, you have fun with that. Like, let's check. Um, and yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that, that doing, I mean, obviously gymnastics was her sport and it's what she loves. And look where she is now. She's 67, watching my kids like she's in her 50s. And I want that for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I just second what you say.
Word. What would be, in the sign off, what would be your largest piece of advice or summation? If a person gets one thing from our conversation, what would you want them to get?
Well, a disclaimer to this that is very important is that it's so hard to be a parent. It is so difficult. So like, you're going to find everything else, figure everything out the hard way. Like you will. And I'm only here 4 years later, 3 kids later, talking about this after multiple conversations. And I've also learned the hard way. So it's okay if you don't say it correctly at first. It's okay if you're still working on yourself. Just make sure that you are. So the disclaimer is that it's difficult. It's very hard to be a parent, because I've even found, I'm learning to manage my own anger as I'm trying to teach my kids how to manage their anger. I mean, as a perfect example. So if you're trying to manage your own nutrition while you're trying to teach them how to manage theirs, it's okay, but just do the work, because it will rub off on them. But I think the biggest then takeaway is that you've got to keep it positive. Like, one of the biggest takeaways is not projecting, not having negative connotations to things. Like, things are not good or bad. There's really a place for everything in life, and it needs to come back to happiness and health, and not things that don't fucking matter.
Definitely. I love that. I love that. I love that. And that concludes this segment of the P2 podcast. Thank you very much for listening. We'd love to hear from you. We'll get clips from this. Obviously, Paige will be able to post about this and whatnot and engage a bit more in a community aspect. But obviously, if you guys listen to something and something hits, share. If you guys have questions on things, share. If you disagree on certain things, share. We want to hear back from you, and we can't wait. Thank you very much again, and we will see you guys next time. Stop.